Good afternoon. Today we're going to take a look at the makeup of Congress and specifically the House and the Senate, how they work. And so the first thing I want you to do is to tell me the following, if you can, without looking them up. Your representative in the House of Representatives, your senators, Speaker of the House, Majority Leader of the Senate, and the President pro tempore of the Senate. And if you don't know them, well, just tell me you don't know them. So our goals for today, to evaluate the difficulties of being a member of Congress, to explain the difference between a term and session of Congress, explain the similarities and differences between the House and the Senate, qualifications, size, duties, elections, etc., to explain the apportionment process, and to describe the process of gerrymandering and the various strategies employed while gerrymandering. So we've already reviewed this before. We've talked about the three branches of government. So Article 1, the legislative branch, Congress makes the laws. Article 2, the executive branch enforces. And Article 3, the judicial branch interprets. So the whole focus of this unit is going to be on Article 1, the legislative branch, the Congress, the part of the government that makes the laws. So first of all, to start off with, let's look at what Congress is, as defined by Urban Dictionary. So according to Urban Dictionary, Congress is a group of elected officials from a single racial and economic demographic, creating a large amount of rules that have never actually been read by anybody. These rules affect a large group of people who they have never met and don't care about. Definition number 2. A gathering of sorts in which useful ideas are proposed, debated some more, revised to please some moronic, babbling baboons whose only goal in life is to make yours miserable, revised the final time voted upon, and usually rejected. Or Part 3. A part of the U.S. legislative branch that has a total of 435 morons that never misses a chance to mess something up. These group of idiots are overpaid and underworked. The sad part is that these people have about a 98% re-election rate. It takes marches, riots, and or mass death to get them to fix anything. The only thing that matters to them are votes and money. They never listen to their constituents. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. These people are truly incompetent. These people will probably be the demise of the United States because of their inability to do anything. Yes, these are not very optimistic or positive views of Congress, but in many cases, they're true. What I'd like you to do throughout the course of the next unit is keep in mind these definitions of Congress and see if you agree or maybe there's a little bit more to it than that. But for now, let's take a look at what a member of Congress gets paid. So your typical member of the House and the Senate is making about $174,000 a year. The majority and minority leaders of the House make a little bit more than that at about $193,000. Pretty good money compared to you and I. This is about 3 times of what I make. That being said, compared to what members of Congress were doing before they became members of Congress, not really the greatest of pay. So most members of Congress, the median personal wealth, $900,000. What this tells us is members of Congress don't necessarily become members of Congress for the high pay. It's not about the money. Really, it comes down to 3 other reasons. Number 1, because they get to make the rules of the game. They get to make the laws, and those laws, in many cases, may benefit their business. Number 2, because they have a genuine call to service and really do want to help the American public. Or number 3, they're egomaniacs, and, well, when you want power, Congress is one great way to get a whole lot of power. Now, when we look at the approval rating statistics for Congress, they don't look so great. The overall approval rating for your individual member of Congress is usually somewhere between 50 and 80%, but the approval rating for Congress as a whole is usually somewhere between 10 and 30%. In fact, it got really, really bad in the last 10 years or so. The approval rating for Congress in 2017 is about 10%. That means 90% of people don't like Congress and don't like the job that they're doing. Yet, when we look at the re-election rate of Congress, congressmen and women get re-elected at a rate of about 80 to 98%. So what I want you to also think about is what is put in place so that people who really don't have a high approval rating as a group as a whole almost always seem to get re-elected. So that's another one of our main focuses of this unit. So first of all, let's look at the makeup of Congress. These things are on your books, so we're going to go kind of quickly. First of all, a term of Congress. Congress meets for what are known as terms, and every term lasts 2 years. So every time we re-elect a new House of Representatives, and that includes the people who are in the Senate at the time, they will make up a term of Congress. And each term of Congress is divided into a session So for every term of Congress, you have 2 sessions. We are currently in the 115th Congress. That is the 115th term of Congress. It's going to last from 2017 to 2019, at which point we'll re-elect or elect the 116th Congress. So Congress is bicameral. We know this from the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise that we've already studied. It's made up of 2 different houses, 2 different bodies. It's made up of the lower house, the House of Representatives, which has 435 members, and the Senate, which is the upper house, which is made up of 100 members. Technically speaking, the power that the House and the Senate have are both the same. It's not like one branch has more power than the other. What makes one the upper and one the lower? House of Representatives only serves for a 2-year term versus 6 years in the Senate, and there are 435 members of the House versus only 100 in the Senate. So the Senate is generally considered a little bit more prestigious, although the pay as well as the actual power of Congress really remains the same whether you're in the House or the Senate. We want to take a look at a diagram of how Congress is divided up. We can divide Congress up into the House and the Senate. So the House 435 members, the Senate 100 members, and then we can break that further down into the House divides up into committees, so does the Senate. There are more than 2 committees. There are probably 20 or 30 committees in each branch of Congress. However, they don't all fit onto the square, so you see 2 there. And then under each committee, there are subcommittees, and there's probably 40 or 50 subcommittees in each branch, but again, we can't all fit them on there. So this is kind of the hierarchy of what Congress looks like. To be a member of the House of Representatives, you must be at least 25 years old, you must have been a United States citizen for at least 7 years, and you have to live in the current state and district for which you're running from. So if you live in Michigan, you can't run for a district in Ohio. Not that you would want to, but you couldn't even if you did. Generally speaking, a member of the House of Representatives will serve for 2 years, and then they'll face re-election every 2 years. And there are 435 total people in the House of Representatives, so a lot of people in the House. Now, because of this, we know that because of the Great Compromise, we know that each state gets a different number of representatives in the House of Representatives, and that is determined by population. So a place like California, population of 33.8 million, they get 53 representatives in the House of Representatives. On the other hand, a tiny state like Maine with a population of under 500,000 people would only get 1 member in the House. On average, a typical member in the House represents somewhere between 600,000 to 700,000 people. And of course, this is based on population. How do we determine the population? You guessed it, every 10 years we hold a census. So every 10 years the government goes state to state, they start collecting data, and based on that they decide how many people live in each state. What that means is if the population goes up or down in a state, then we'll have to redraw the district lines. We're going to have to come up with new districts. That means some states would get more people, some states would get less. And this process is what is known as the apportionment or reapportionment or redistricting process. So when we divide up the states, that is based on population, that is apportionment or reapportionment or redistricting. All 3 things mean the same thing. So if we look at our chart, all the orange ones, including Michigan, those states lost people after the 2010 census, and so they would lose the number of representatives they have. The dark blue ones gained representatives, so they too would have to redistrict to make up for an added district, and of course the gray ones stay the same. Now when it comes to the redistricting process, this is typically carried out by the state legislature. So the state legislature gets to decide how they're going to divide up the districts. We're one of the only countries in the world that does this by letting politicians do the dividing up. And one of the reasons why representatives have such a high re-election rate is they actually get to draw the district. So if you're the party in power, you can draw the district to make it almost impossible for you to lose the election. So a little bit on the apportionment process.
Political power in Congress is based around population. Bigger states, like California and Texas, are rewarded with more seats than smaller states, like Rhode Island and Delaware. Since our population is constantly changing, people move, have babies, die, the Constitution requires that a census be held every 10 years to count the people of each state. Census numbers are used in the process of reapportionment to determine how many of the 435 congressional seats each state gets. As states grow in population, they get more seats, and they take those seats from states that have grown less quickly. After each reapportionment, every state must alter the boundaries of their congressional districts to account for these changes. This is called redistricting. The United States is the only advanced democracy in the world where politicians directly participate in the districting process. Why does this matter? You live in a district. Many districts, actually. Congressional, state senate, assembly, city council, school. Everyone in America lives in districts. All districts are bounded by lines. The way district lines are drawn can determine who represents you for decades at a time.
So this process can get political at times, and when it gets political, that is what is called gerrymandering, named after the founding father, Elbridge Gerry. His last name was Gary, but it looked like Jerry, and so the way the old thing goes, one of the first districts to be redrawn for a political advantage, so if gerrymandering is drawing a district to the advantage of a political party, you can see in the diagram on the left, when they drew a few districts in Massachusetts, when they drew one of the districts, it came out to be this weird little shape like in the right, which was made fun of by a political cartoon, and somebody said, that looks like a salamander. And then somebody said, no, it's not a salamander, it's a gerrymander. And so when we get really odd-shaped districts like that, that is called gerrymandering. And one of the reasons why this is done is so that one political party can solidify their power. So if you want to think about how this works, let's assume all the R's are Republican voters, the D's are the Democratic voters. So in this current example, we have 4 districts. 3 of them are controlled by Republicans, 1 by Democrats. But if we've got to redistrict, we've got to reduce the number of districts down to 3. So we could draw the lines like this, and like this. And if we redraw the lines, you can see one district would be controlled by the Democrats, one would be controlled by the Democrats, and one would be controlled by the Republicans. So we'd have 2 Democratic districts, 1 Republican. But let's take the same group of people. Let's reduce it again. This time let's draw the lines like this, and like this. And if we redraw the lines this time, we have a Republican district, a Democrat district, and another Republican district. So we took the same group of people, but this time came up with 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat instead of the other way around. Basically, the way we rearrange our districts, we could have it so that one party could win or lose a particular election. One of the craziest instances of gerrymandering was from the city of a district just outside of Chicago, Illinois. And this is what the Illinois district looked like. So you can see some parts of the city were literally connected by nothing more than a road or 2. And this obviously is a little bit shady. By today's standards, this would be considered illegal. The Supreme Court said gerrymandering in and of itself is illegal. The problem is proving gerrymandering is extremely difficult to do. Now, this one was pretty obvious that it's been gerrymandered, but a lot of the gerrymandering is not so obvious today, and although it does happen. And we'll take a look at your own district, which was gerrymandered. So, packing and cracking, strategies for gerrymandering.
So how exactly does someone go about protecting their own political party and actually gerrymandering a district? There are 2 successful practices: packing a district and cracking a district. Packing is the process of drawing district lines and packing in your opponents like cattle into as few districts as possible. If more districts equals more votes, the fewer the districts there are, the fewer votes the opposition party will get. Packing, then, decreases the opponent's voter strength and influence. Cracking is the opposite, taking one district and cracking it into several pieces. This is usually done in districts where your opponent has many supporters. Cracking spreads these supporters out among many districts, denying your opponent a lot of votes. When you have a large number of people who would generally vote for one type of party, those folks are known as a voting bloc. Cracking is a way to break that all up. So when would a party choose to pack their opponent's districts rather than crack them? Well, that really depends on what the party needs. To dilute your opponent's voters, you could pack them into one district and leave the surrounding districts filled with voters of your own party. Or, if you and your party are in power when it's time to redraw district lines, you could redraw districts and crack up a powerful district and spread your opponent's voters out across several neighboring districts. So, Governor Jerry in
So if we just want to review the two strategies for reapportionment or apportionment or redistricting or gerrymandering as it's called, one strategy to pack the opposition, to concentrate the opposition. So if you had a lot of people, you're just going to assume that the other party is going to win. So you put them all in one district and you let them win that district only. That way they don't play any threat to your chances of getting reelected. The other strategy, of course, that they mention is cracking. This idea is spreading the opponent thin. So if you've got a bunch of people in the opposition party, instead of putting them together in one district where they'd be very strong, you put a couple here, a couple there, a couple everywhere, and by spreading them out, they stand very little to no chance of winning there. And this is something that's pretty common. If you'd like to do a gerrymandering activity, I'd invite you to go onto Moodle. There is a game called the Redistricting Game, redistrictinggame.org. And you can kind of play that and you can kind of play around and see what it's like and how it works. This is what your district looked like. Well, this is what Michigan looked like in 2009, so before the census. So from 2000 to 2010, this is what our districts looked like. You're the blue dot on the bottom, the 11th Congressional District. This is what things look like today. You're still the 11th Congressional District, but it looks a little bit different. So from 2000 to 2010, this is what your district looked like, and then this is what your district looked like today. Quite obviously gerrymandered. You're in the 11th Congressional District, the 11th House Congressional District. You can look up who your member of the House of Representatives is, and you'll be able to tell me a little bit about him and what he did, and we'll do that in an activity later in this unit. My congressional district, I'm in the 7th, which is currently controlled by Tim Walberg. Got elected in 2006 to 2008, reelected in 2010. You can see that my district was a little bit gerrymandered, not quite as bad as yours, but still it took place. On to the Senate. We know that there are 100 total people in the Senate. We know that based on the Great Compromise, 2 per state. So in order to be a Senate, a little bit more prestigious to be a senator because there aren't as many of them. In order to be a senator, you must be at least 30 years old. You must be a resident of the United States, a citizen of the United States for at least 9 years, and you must be a resident of this state from which you're going to be elected. And so a little bit stricter than the House of Representatives. The Senate is a continuous body. What that means is the entire Senate is not up for re-election at the same time. Only 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election at a time. When we look at the diagram below, the classes don't really mean much of anything other than the year that you got elected. So it's not like class 1 are more prestigious than class 2 or 3. They're all the same. It's just the year you got reelected. So if you get elected in 2012, you serve a 6-year term. You are up for re-election in 2018. Elected in 2014, you'd be reelected in 2020. 2016, you'd be reelected in 2022. And the cycle continues. What this means is we will never have 100% of the Senate new members. It is a continuous body. 2/3 of the Senate will always be the people who are already in office. So a little less turnover in the Senate than in the House. Our senators, if you go on the close-up trip to Washington, D.C., you might get to meet our senator like we did here in the picture. Again, you can look those up in the activity we're doing next week. Here's our other senator. Again, you can look up some stuff about him. And a retired senator. I think it's worth noting Carl Levin served in the Senate longer than, at the time he retired, he was the longest serving member of the Senate. He was first elected in 1978 and continued on until 2014. And what this meant is he got his choice of committees. He was on the Armed Services Committee, the chairman, which is a very prestigious and high-ranking committee. He was also on the Homeland Security Committee, as well as the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. He always took the time to meet with us whenever we went on the close-up trip. But one of the really cool things about a long-serving member of the Senate is they do have a lot of power. And so Democrats and Republicans generally tended to like Carl Levin because he could get a lot of stuff done for the state of Michigan. A little bit difference between the House and the Senate. You can pause this and read it over. We've gone through most of this stuff already. That's all I've got for you today, and we'll continue with more on part 2.